Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to this Destination Marketing, Re-Enchanting the City Travel Experience Conference. My name is Peter Hook, and I'll be your MC for the next hour, accompanied by a very distinguished panel of expert guests who I'll introduce shortly. Now, they're based in various parts of the country, and I know there are so many people watching this today who are based around Australia, around the world. So it's really in order for us to pay respects to the traditional owners of this country, the lands across Australia, and pay our respects to elders past and present. And now, just a few thanks in order before we start the discussions. The French-Australian Chamber of Commerce for the organisation of the event, the naming rights sponsor for the event, Schneider Electric, and the French Embassy, Austrade, and the many other supporters who've sponsored this series of online conferences. Now, following our individual discussions, we'll have a round table where the three panelists will be able to talk about the various subjects that we're going to go through today. And then I urge you to stay online, because at the end of the conference, we welcome your questions direct to the panelists. And will be so many questions to answer, because let's face it, this era of travel and tourism is possibly the most dynamic, but also the most challenging in our lifetimes. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with airports, because as you've probably seen so many TV reports, news reports, the first thing they always illustrate this with is empty airports. And it's quite a symbol of the fact of how we've gone from these very bustling airports, full of passengers, full of life, to a relatively empty shells. And that, of course, affects the airport operations and those who operate out of those. So our first guest today is Przemek Lesniak, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Lagardère Travel Retail Pacific. They're a global leader in the travel industry and the largest in Australia and the Pacific, with an extensive presence across the country. In fact, Przemek, before I start asking questions, it might be a good idea, because even though Lagardère is such a large organization, perhaps people aren't quite aware of what it means for them when they travel. We're seeing some of those images behind you, but just a little bit of background to the company and its operations here in the Pacific. Przemek, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Peter, for the introduction, and thank you for having me on this panel today. Yes, Lagardère Travel Retail is one of the biggest travel retail operators globally. So we operate in three business lines: business, which is travel essentials, duty-free, and food services across various airports, number of airports in the world, more than 30 countries. So at this point of time, we are obviously focusing on the Pacific, but there's a lot of things going on globally as well due to the current situation. So travel industry has been significantly impacted, and this is not dissimilar in the Pacific. In the Pacific, we operate 145 stores across the three countries: New Zealand, Australia, and New Caledonia. Most of the stores we obviously have in Australia due to the size of the market. And our stores, pretty much in line with the evolution of the traffic, have been closed end of February, beginning March, most of them, and remain shut in certain terminals until today. And obviously, the situation has been difficult, but we are confident, that the future is bright for the industry. Will be different in a lot of aspects, but absolutely will be back to trade soon.
Now, I'm just wondering, you obviously are part of a global network. Do your colleagues think that actually you out here in the Pacific are faring better than most of the other parts of the world?
This is a very good question, and actually funny question as well, because look, it depends when you ask this question. If you ask this question literally now, they would probably think that yes, the Pacific is better off. When we were going into the second wave, before the second wave happened in Europe, obviously we were probably in their mind a bit disadvantaged. But it's true that the activity across the globe is polarized, with China being now ahead of everyone else, with Europe struggling a lot, with US still struggling, and hopefully the Pacific with the next months with the reopening of the borders, will be happy to follow China.
In fact, you say that there's disparity between various regions, but even within Australia, for instance, and probably New Zealand, there's a big disconnect between cities, and that's the focus largely of our conversation today about urban tourism and the future of that. But one of the aspects of the COVID crisis and how it's affected tourism is the fact that regional areas seem to have thrived at the expense of city centres. Is that your experience? Because you are involved in many regional centres.
Yes, that's a very good point. And indeed, this is pretty much what we can observe in our stores. Regional airports are doing pretty well, depending obviously on the traffic and the destinations that were reserved from this airport. Because if you look at certain airports which were more exposed on interstate travel, then obviously they are in a more difficult situation. Airports which are more local, regional, are doing very well, and because people want to travel, because you can keep the borders closed, but in the States you've got still a lot of people wanting to go and have a break, go for leisure and spend some time with families somewhere else than staying locked down in their place of residence. There's a lot of travel regional happening. So for instance, Western Australia, Queensland, these states are really having good regional traffic evolution, just because when you want to leave Brisbane and travel regionally, you can travel pretty much everywhere in Queensland without restrictions. But obviously you can't travel interstate, so interstate travel is still affected. If you go to Perth and you want and suddenly you're leaving Perth and you want to go to Western Australia for a break, you want to go to northwestern Australia, you want to go to Margaret River, you want to fly to regional airports there, the regional traffic will still be important. So that's about leisure, but also these states are very much structured around the FIFO travelers. So there's a lot of still work and essential work that goes through the terminals, which are regional. So that's why regional destinations are still very well performing for us.
Now, I'm sure a lot of those who are watching this video today will have the same issue. Obviously, a lot of your business, possibly up to say 90% of the business, was disrupted during the worst period of COVID. Was that reflected in your rental and things like that at the airports? Because you would have been put under immense pressure to operate economically during such a difficult time.
Yes, this period has been absolutely a test of the partnerships with all major airports we operate in. We have 22 airport business partners in the region, and I must say there's no one who didn't really take the challenge with us and who didn't really allow us to survive and help us to survive through this period of time. So we are really grateful. We have great partnerships with airports and a lot of understanding of this situation. So otherwise we wouldn't be able to talk now, because probably the business would be already shut.
That is very encouraging. Now, look, I think most people would say that airport retail has changed dramatically over the years. It's become much more accessible, fluid. The whole experience is so much more personal. But I think, given that the emphasis is on security, it's on actually seclusion, it's on keeping people separate, how much is that going to influence your operations over the years to come? Because you need to talk to customers, and yet COVID is all about keeping customers away. So is there sort of a thought about the future of airport retail?
We absolutely need to think about the future of the airport, but I'll be happiest person in the world if I could answer these questions straight away now, and I would know what's going to happen. The point is, we will have to test a lot of solutions, we need to change the way we serve customers. We need to change potentially also the floor plan of the stores, make them more spacious, and to avoid people congestions. We will need to look after social distancing. Obviously, in the first stage, is going to be very important. But I think the power of demand and the power of curiosity from customers and willingness to shop will be will be definitely stronger, and these restrictions will not stop them from buying. We will just need to adapt. So there's a lot of things we'll need to do in terms of social distancing and really making them feel safe in the stores. But also we'll have to use a lot of new technology to attract people and just get them into the stores, because they may be afraid in the first step. Yeah.
So you would see much more, for instance, of an e-commerce solution, perhaps integrating with the shopping experience at the airport.
Yeah, well, I don't really know yet what the e-commerce would mean for us. There's absolutely a drive towards online, and we want to see how we can integrate this in the whole ecosystem and the business model for us. So we'll be doing a lot of tests there. But first and foremost, especially around the first stage of the recovery, what's going to be really important is to use technology and digital technology and any other potential technology to promote products, to show to customers that they can actually safely buy in our stores. So the recent evolution in technology that allows you, for instance, to feel and smell perfumes without touching anything in the store, that's something which is exactly the way we need to go in the first stage, and then we'll see how it evolves. What was great about COVID is that basically the QR codes have become so used now, and it's like almost like the way you interact with restaurants and food service venues in the cities. So now when you come to the airport and for whatever reason you would need to use QR code, you wouldn't even think about what it is. You know exactly, it became natural for the people to use it. So we can use it to promote products, but also to make sure that all the safety measures that we have in the stores are well communicated to the customers. So yeah, I mean, this is what I think will be very important at the beginning, and then we'll evolve probably more and more towards e-commerce, pending the legislation, pending the evolution of the industry. This is a big question mark.
Now, thank you very much, Shemek. So from airports, let's go to hotels. We will be having a roundtable sort of very soon after we hear from our three speakers. I've been involved with the hotel industry for 30 years, and a lot of that time in two different companies has been Simon McGrath, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of Accor Pacific, over 400 hotels. And with Simon, you know, we've experienced many crises in the past. In fact, it was interesting. Someone was just pointing out a little while ago that the 1990s economic crisis in Australia, when we had the last recession, in fact, unemployment was higher than it currently is, and the GDP falls were lower. And then, of course, we've had Asian economic crisis. We've also had the larger global economic crisis. We've had SARS, we've had bird flu. We've had lots and lots of different things. Only this year we had bushfires. So hotel industry has learnt to survive and even thrive in some cases in these circumstances, but it's always difficult. Now, Simon has, as I said, 400 hotels in the Pacific to look after. And it's been, I think, one case, because I'm in the area of publicizing hotels, sometimes over the last 6 or 7 months, hotels have been in the publicity angle for the wrong reasons, perhaps. And yet, if we look at it, they have done a remarkable job bringing back Australians, in most cases, looking after the quarantine system. So, Simon, if I could ask you, first of all, there has been a lot of talk about quarantine. Hotels basically have done a remarkable job in repatriating Australians from overseas. Do you think you've been treated fairly?
Good morning to everybody. I think whether we've been treated fairly or not, we came out very early on and we were quite vocal about the role that our employees were playing in repatriating Australians and New Zealanders back into the country and looking after them under a quarantine system. Clearly, the quarantine system in most cases has proven to be very successful for the country. But we had frontline workers that were worried about their jobs and their future, and yet they were still putting themselves at risk by caring for for people that were coming back. So I think unfairly, I think it's, you get a bit of a media run on a particular topic, and it does run for some time. But I think, conversely, a lot of the governments have come out since, and I certainly know the New South Wales government, New Zealand government, and others have come out and spoken highly about the hotel sector and the role that it's played. And I think it's even more relevant because the context of many people think, well, that business is great business for the hotel sector, and it's, they should be appreciative and so on. At the end of the day, it contributes about 5 or 6% to total occupancy. So it wasn't a great stimulus in terms of fiscal support. It was good, but it certainly wasn't the saviour. And yet the work that was being done by the hotel companies, and most importantly employees, was quite substantial. And I can tell you so many stories of how beautiful it was for those employees they were caring for people on their birthdays. They were making sure celebrations were acknowledged. They were adapting. We were taking exercise bikes up to people's rooms out of gyms. We were yoga mats and everything. That we really understood the mental health responsibility, and it was largely government responsibility, but the hotel stood in.
Well, in fact, the Sofitel Wentworth here in Sydney was renowned for putting on concerts. They all went on the balconies, and it was quite remarkable. And there was a tremendously good feeling about how to cope with a crisis. And I suppose that's the big point, is that none of us could have forecast this. I just wonder, how quickly was a hotel group like Accor able to suddenly change its whole operations, change its whole raison d'etre, given that it went from this COVID thing to suddenly everything is closed. It was a dramatic change.
Yeah, I think it was largely underpinned by our relationships with government. We have deep relationships with government ongoing. And we started to get direct calls from ministers and so on to sit together and work on practical ways in which it was a logistics. If you remember the first wave of flights that came back into Sydney, I think they landed at 6 p.m. and they got to hotels at 4 a.m. So, it was really, that first day and a half was pretty tough. We had very little notice about borders being shutting down, and then police, health, ministers, hotels, transport all had to coordinate very quickly a very safe environment. So that really took probably 36 hours to regather itself. And then logically in the first month there were learnings coming out of it. We set some pretty high standards early on of not mixing business, of making sure that we really adhered to a very strict protocol, often greater than what governments expected. And we just understood the risk of that. So, look, I think the basis of it, the success that the hotels provided throughout the Pacific was, firstly, it's a sector that you quite rightly point out. It deals with crisis, it deals with events, it moves quickly. It's a very dynamic sector. So it was something that we understood and we have the capability to do. And for us, certainly, it was about our relationships with government, that it's too late to form a relationship with government in the middle of a crisis. We had those deeply embedded and have them deeply embedded year on year. And we enjoy that. And we work, these are municipal assets for the betterment of cities and regions, and they do very well in that case.
Now, our audience is around the world, around Australia. The whole question of travel in the future is really the subject of what we're talking about. Do you see hotel quarantine systems being in place for the next year? Are you planning for 2021 to be much of the same, or how are you?
Yeah, I don't think anything is the same on any particular day at the moment. So that word's almost gone out of our vernacular. But I do see quarantining in some form working through 2021. There might be short versions of quarantine. There might be different sectors. It might be related to government. It might be related to armed forces, maybe related to sport, as we've seen most recently with AFL and the NRL and now rugby and netball as well. So, yeah, I do see quarantine business in our market for the certainly for 2021. Once again, I'll make the point, it won't, solve the issues of, occupancy for us. We're an industry that operated at 80% occupancy previously. But I think hotels will certainly play a role.
Now, obviously, we're not going to have the international audience that was so powerful for Sydney hotels and Australian hotels. How much of a difference have you seen between the city areas and regional areas? Because, we're talking about urban tourism. There seems to be a complete antipathy towards big crowds, and yet cities are about crowds. So how do we break free from that fear and safety issue and bring back urban hotels into the travel mix?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and it's very hard to make predictions at the moment on any trend, because the trends and trends are driven by human nature and how we feel. They're changing every fortnight. You know, we've run this business for the last 6 months on a fortnightly basis. We execute to, this week extraordinarily well, and then we predict what's happening next week. You really can't go further than that. It's not to say that you don't have insight to mid and long term, but you look at what's happening in Europe today. Who would have thought 6 weeks ago Europe's about to shut down? You know, and look at its borders again. And so I think travel, the regional city aspect. You know, again, 3 weeks ago you would have said regional so strong, cities are weak, and so and there's no future. Today we're seeing in cities smaller groups of people meeting. We're seeing, I think people are fatiguing a little bit from Zoom and Microsoft meetings and other such forms. You're seeing, some people, 20% of people come back into the office, which by nature of that, it's dragging others are starting to contemplate that and think about that and in fact want that. So I'm seeing much more activity in all the cities. I think you see the border announcements impending. I think people acknowledge we need to get back into the cities for a variety of reasons. So I think it'll be a longer shift. I think the regional areas, if we talk to that, most immediately are full and doing very well. On weekends and public holidays, midweeks, there's still some effort required, but they'll pick up that sort of outbound traveller from the region that was so strong and validate for that over the Christmas and summer period. So I think in short, the regional areas are doing strong, but the city areas are starting to see some green shoots as well. And look, I think, most crises, and, if we understand that the industry and that we're in is beautifully built around people, short-term memory and self-interest will drive a lot of change in the future. And I think, the people will make their own decisions around safety and health. They'll want to see evidence of it, but there'll be varying degrees of safety and health that people expect, and they'll determine that throughout the course of 2021.
Now, in fact, you touched on it slightly, Simon. As far as I can see, the two markets that probably are most affected by this COVID crisis is the meetings market, how you have a safe meeting with 500 people, and the corporate market. And look, most of the people watching today are in the corporate market. They're used to being on airplanes all the time. They're used to being in airports. They're used to being in hotels. What are your views for 2021 about those two markets, the meetings and the corporate markets coming back?
Well, I think they'll both be led by competition. And what I mean by that is, and I've learned this recently in a hybrid conferencing sense. I thought we'd all be online doing conferences. I've been to 2 hybrid conferences and they were beautifully managed. There was 150 people in a 400 people boardroom, in a ballroom. It was beautifully set up, and then it had this great online richness as well. And there was some 500 or 600 people online. I know the feedback there was those that were in the room really enjoyed it. Those that online enjoyed it as well. But I think next year there's a lot of people that will be online saying, I'd like to be in the room. I'd like to be there, because there's nothing, overwhelmingly, the need to connect, the need to develop relationships is critical. And I think one thing that we're sometimes overlooking when we look at the new world is we're all trading on current relationships. It's easy. I can have a Zoom meeting with you, Peter. We have a current relationship. We know each other well. I know your business, you know our business, and we can do it. We can engage and trade. I think what is going to become quite apparent is new relationships are tough. Develop a new relationship with a party without meeting them, without having some sort of connection, is going to be tough. And I think people, and that's why I come back to competition to do business. I think people will, on the basis that they can move and travel safely, will do that. If there's a new account in Melbourne, I'm sure, the option of Zoom versus getting down there and showing that you've made a real effort to see a new account, you know what people will take. So I think on the conferencing, the hybrid conferencing will bring us back over a period of time. I think you'll have people in a room, 100 people in a room, 700 people online. It works very well, but that will sort of that shift and balance of who's in the room and who's not will just grow naturally over the next coming years. And I think that's great. I think in terms of corporate, I think the ability to grow revenue, which is, we're in a world that this is all about revenue. Everyone's done what they can to costs. Everything's about revenue and new opportunities. And, to sit in front of someone, present to someone, talk to someone, engage with someone, it's very hard to beat doing that personally. And I think competitive nature of us, which is in all of us, and particularly in the corporate world, will drive that back.
Well, thank heavens for that, Simon, because the era of the long lunch should not be over for all of us on this. I'm afraid Zoom drinks only has a certain place in this world. But look, just finally, before we go to destination marketing, just the hotel experience. Now, hotels have done so much to try and connect with their guests, make it a much more human experience when you walk in, that it's not a sterile experience. The whole fear of COVID is that we're going to make hotels like hospitals. Are you confident that that the whole cleaning of hands and things like that, people will get over that and they'll really want a human experience when they go to hotels?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, hotels have always provided safety in whatever form. Safety in food and beverage, safety in physical safety, privacy, data privacy. So any movement that's come through the wider community, hotels have picked up and provided that level of safety. And I think if you go into most hotels now, you'll see the highest level of safety, good communication, and a group of team members that really enjoy caring for people. Again, I don't think those employees they don't hide behind that safety. I think they still have to engage, they still have to care. Where they might have been explaining how to fill in a registration card previously, they're now explaining how to move about the building safely and how to enjoy the building without, and feel very safe in a cleanliness and risk sense. So, I think at the moment, I think the food and beverage animation in hotels needs to be lifted. We're so in fear of putting people together in restaurants and bars that in some cases you're checking into a hotel and the food and beverage is a little bit underwhelming. But I think that's appropriate over the last couple of months in this, when we've been in such isolation. It's been so appropriate to be careful. But I think you'll see really clever forms of food and beverage. You'll see really nice forms of welcoming, which is already in place, good signage, and very welcome and positive signage. And I think, the hospitality sector will deliver what it always does. It's a beautiful sector, very philanthropic by nature, and very dynamic and creates ways of getting things done. So, no, I'm very positive about service. And we're at the moment, we're obsessing about service in terms of listening to our customers. And they might have been talking to us about something 6 months ago. They're talking to us about COVID today, and we'll respond to what they need. And it's an enjoyable part of what we're doing.
Thanks very much, Simon McGrath, Chief Executive Officer of Accor Pacific. And look, the subject of this conference is destination marketing. And what better place to talk about now than somewhere like Paris, because it's arguably the world's most popular urban tourism destination. It captures the best in terms of lifestyle, culture, art, heritage, and sheer beauty. And of course, it's in the news at the moment because everyone seems to be watching Emily in Paris. Now, not all the critics think it's a very good TV show, but the one aspect of it that everyone agrees about is that Paris comes up magnificently, even if it is from an American perspective. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Patrick Benamou, the Regional Director of Atout France, for 2 decades probably. And I don't think there is anyone that embodies the passion of Paris and France better than Patrick. In fact, I was thinking that passion, Paris, and Patrick, they all start with P. So there must be something in the air. But then again, we've had Emily in Paris, but we've now got obviously a situation that is far more difficult for him. So while a lot of the people on this video will know Patrick very well, I'm not going to talk about him. I'm going to let Patrick talk about himself. So Patrick, a little bit of background about you and of course, some background to Atout France. Over to you, Patrick.
Bonjour, Pierre. Bonjour, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell you a bit more about our marketing activity for Atout France. So I'm not in Paris. I'm in my office in Bly Street, Sydney. You spoke about Emily in Paris, but you have today Patrick in Paris. So I took the of Emily. I have my chocolate croissant next to me. As a matter of fact, without a joke, Emily in Paris is an amazing exposure. It's a fourth rating worldwide for Netflix. So it will give us a lot of exposure and help. Talking about myself, which is not the topic, but I was born in a tourist town in France between Paris and Champagne, a very small village called Provins. It's the second medieval city of France after Carcassonne. So it was a good omen to be born in a city that thrive on tourism. I went on to do an MBA in Reims, capital of Champagne. That's how we pronounce Reims with and Champagne. And then I was fortunate to go to California to promote French wine in California for a couple of years. I went on to Club Med, that wonderful institution, still an institution in the 80s and 90s with 1 million travelers around the world. And the best that have happened to me, I was hired to open the French tourist office in Australia 40 years ago. At that time, we had a visa and we registered about 300,000 Australians going to France. In 2018, we went to 1 million going to France. I haven't stayed in Australia for the 4 decades. I went on to Amsterdam and to Canada. So I had an experience of a long haul market, Australia, a short haul market, Holland, and a middle range market, which was Canada. As a matter of fact, a big surprise in Canada, you have 30 million people living in Canada. It's 8 hours from Paris, but Australia has more tourists to France than Canada. Atout France is the government agency I've been the pleasure to be working for the last 40 years to promote tourism to France. So we're a bit like tourism on Australia, but not quite the same. Firstly, we don't tend to put a shrimp on the barbie when we are in France. We mostly put maybe a frog leg or Côte de Boeuf washed down with a Pinot Noir from Burgundy. But the difference between Tourism Australia and Atout France is that it's a joint venture between the government and the private sector. Napoleon used to say about La Banque de France, French bank, it has to be in the hands of the government, but not totally in the hands of the government. And Atout France is a bit the same. We have 1,200 companies participating in a funding to promote tourism to France in about 30 countries around the world. And one of our most prominent partner and our first partner in Australia is, of course, Accor Hotel. We don't, unlike Tourism Australia, we don't only promote tourism to France, but we have the perimeter of activities a bit wider. For example, Simon, we do the classification of hotels in France. We have a team doing that. We just created the Palace distinction that France badly needed. We also do the registration of the licensing of the travel agents in France. We also operate in terms of the offer in renovation loans to the private sector to renovate hotel, to create a new product. So it's a very wide perimeter of activities. But in Australia, we do the promotion of France to the consumer and to the trade. In Australia, you have 5,000 travel agencies, close to 20,000 travel agents that we have to convince to send their clients to Provence or Aquitaine rather than to Andalusia or Tuscany. So we've been very active. There is about 40 tourism offices in Australia trying to fetch the tourist dollar. So as far as what our year has been, COVID has not prevented us from diminishing activities. We are lucky that over the years, we managed to gather about 100,000 Australians in our social media and database that we have been trying to keep inspired and dream about France. And with some lateral thinking, considering the situation worldwide and in Australia, we have engaged them in, for example, French movie night online, a very successful French movie night online. On Sunday night, they switch to Netflix and they can watch a movie and they can win some bottles of champagne and beautiful French product with interaction with our team. We've recently done some champagne tasting also online with Moom Champagne, 700 people connected to learn about how to store champagne, how to drink champagne, how to pair champagne with. But beyond those digital activities, we kept very active. We've just released a beautiful magazine on France that will be distributed all around Australia in L'Occitane boutique, online as well with a Qantas frequent flyer. But most of our activities are either advertising or events. And as a matter of fact, between now and the end of the year, we have 7 different events. Simon, I reassure you, 100% of them are at Sofitel hotels. Last week, we had a Bordeaux Wine Society. Next week, we are promoting Burgundy. Australians love their wine. Australians tend to go to the wine regions of France. I'll give you 2 examples. In Bordeaux, for example, 1 out of 10 tours sold to the Médoc or to Saint-Emilion, sold to the foreign tourists, are sold to one Australian. In Champagne, in Épernay, which is the second capital of Champagne, because the first one I told you is Reims, my hometown. In Épernay, they have more Australian tourists than American tourists. You might know that Australia consumes a lot of champagne. It's the 8th market in the world with 7 million bottles drank every year. And recently we were in touch with Beaune, you know, the wine capital of Burgundy. They did 20,000 bed nights last year with Australian. So wine tourism is important to us, but not only wine tourism, of course, gastronomy. We've been doing also a lot of presence on the battlefield tours, you know, to go to Villers-Bretonneux or Fromelles, to the sites where the grandfathers of Australians used to fight during the First World War, and it's multi-generational, and we've been developing some campaigns and training for travel agents on battlefield tourism. And recently we've put together a commercial about Paris. Paris is a city that has suffered the most in France. Simon, the average occupancy rate in Paris is 81% worldwide, but since the beginning of the year, it went down to 22% occupation in Paris. Not exactly the same in not every cities has suffered so much, especially the cities of the south of France who have benefited from domestic tourism. The French didn't go overseas, but they stayed in France. So cities like Marseille, Nice, and Cannes have done quite a good summer. So let me maybe show you the first video, the commercial that went on air on SBS about Paris.
G'day Australia, I love Paris.
Dear Australian friends, welcome to Paris region.
J'aime Paris et j'adore la maillot jaune.
At the cool hotels, we love Parisian hospitality.
Bonjour Paris, je t'aime.
We love you, Paris.
J'aime la mode à Paris.
J'aime Paris et j'aime la France.
Air France can't wait to take you to Paris.
Okay, Patrick. Now you've had a wonderful advertisement there, and everybody knows and loves France and loves Paris. But one of the things that it was showing in that video were huge crowds in Paris. There were spectacular crowds. There were people together. That's what we think of Paris. We also know, of course, that France and Paris have had very, very high levels of COVID during 2020. How do you see Paris coping in that post-COVID world? If people are still worried about going to cities, going to urban centers. How is France and how is Paris going to readjust?
I was expecting that difficult question, so let me just have a glass of champagne. Paris, well, what has been amazing since COVID is that industry professionals have been demonstrating a remarkable ability to adapt every day. Each time there is an announcement of the government, there are new measures, restaurateurs, hoteliers, professionals in the cultural and entertainment industry. They've been working to really provide safety to the travelers. Health measures, tailored opening times, and Paris has also been promoting sustainable tourism. Paris Tourism, for example, have been trying to avoid the crowds that we have along the banks of the Seine or at the Louvre. You know, the Louvre for the first time reached 10 million visitors. I don't know if we will have the time to speak over tourism. France is not as much concerned by over tourism than Barcelona or Venice or also Amsterdam, where I was posted. We have over tourism on the banks of tourism of Paris, at the Louvre with 10 million, and also at Mont Saint-Michel. Of course, you know Mont Saint-Michel, that sanctuary, not in Brittany, in Normandy. I'm next to my assistant Sophie, who's from Normandy, so there's always a big rivalry between Brittany and Normandy. Mont Saint-Michel is in Normandy. Mont Saint-Michel, you know, it's a 44 inhabitants living in Mont Saint-Michel, and they have 3 million tourists. So can you imagine? That's where over tourism is mostly over there. Well, in Saint-Tropez, for example, Saint-Tropez is a village of 5,000 people, and it goes to 5 million during summer. So Paris Tourism have been trying to develop walking tours in the 11th, 18th, 19th arrondissement in order to put the crowds off the main tracks that we have. So if Paris has suffered in terms of tourism, the rest of the country is not the same. And Australia is a good market for us because the specificity of Australia is that they arrive in France when the other leaves. There's no peak of seasonality because the seasons are reversed, the holidays are reversed. Australians tend to go to France from March to November, and they tend to go into the most remote part of France, where you would not imagine the queries that we have at the office. Some people want a gîte on the right bank of the Dordogne because of not the Chardonnay, but the Madiran is a bit better because of the sun. So when we meet travel professionals in France, what they told us? Australians are everywhere. So hopefully, because of that pattern, we won't be suffering too much from the overcrowding and the uncertainty and the anxiety of the big tourist spots.
No, well, thank you, Patrick. In fact, when we do our panel discussion, I'd like to talk about over-tourism and sustainability, which you brought up. But look, I think most people watching this will think, how are cities going to recover? How is Paris possibly going to sell itself when everyone knows, as you said, people at the Louvre, Tour Eiffel, it is bustling. So how do you redefine yourself? Or does Paris really just have to accept that it's going to take a long time to get back to where it was?
Yes, it won't be straight away. Also, travelers I think they are resilient once the vaccine has been proven efficient. You know that in 2018, there were 1.4 billion tourists around the world, with over the last 5 years, an increase of 8% per year. So tourism now is in the DNA of every population. Out of the 1.4 billion, we had 700 million in Europe. And then it was Asia Pacific with 350 million. So to answer your question, what we have been doing also, Peter, is try to put the focus on other cities than Paris. I haven't told you also, I don't know if it matters to the audience, but our business model also at Tourism France, unlike Tourism Australia, we are not 100% fully funded by the government, but by the private sector, by the cities, by the region. And we made some arrangements with, for example, Bordeaux. And let me show you what we have done Bordeaux and Nice, which is very popular for Australia. So recently at Sofitel Darling Harbour and Sofitel Wentworth, we had a training session for travel agent, and we also had an event created for influencers, bloggers, journalists. And let me in 2 minutes visualize what we do to promote tourism out of Paris.
Quand on partait de bon matin, quand on partait sur les chemins à bicyclette, nous étions quelques bons copains. Il y avait Fernand.
Comment allez-vous? How are you? Madame la Consul Générale, chère Anne, Madame Julie Bedeau, representing the French ambassador Christophe Penaud, Monsieur le Consul honoraire de Monaco, dear Andrew, my mate and host, Denis Anon, Director of Tourism of Nice Côte d'Azur.
Dedicated to French gastronomy, Tour de France and Nice. We are running a small country, in fact, from the mountain, the ski resorts, to the sea.
Oui, je peux parler français si vous voulez. Every July for pretty much 17 years, you know, we're riding around and you realise how important it is. You see the traditions, the culture, and once you kind of get surrounded by the tour and you realise the importance of the Tour de France. And
a night in Bordeaux, an evening epitomizing the excellence of France in terms of flamboyance, finesse, panache, class, and of course modesty.
I am very, very pleased to welcome you tonight in Bordeaux. Thank you very much. Merci.
Yesterday, we formalized the creation of the Bordeaux Commandery in Melbourne. 60 members became commander, and Eugène Shea is now maître of this commandery.
We have here today l'équipe de France du tourisme, the French team of tourism.
We're really truly honored to experience the gastronomic excellence of Alain Ducasse's renowned restaurant in Paris called Benoit. So please, a huge thanks to the whole teams from Alain Ducasse and Sofitel.
I was challenged by Patrick to say humongous, and it's so amazing to be here in front of a humongous crowd. And thank you very much for having us here.
Come on in. So sexy, go crazy, my baby. No maybe, if you want me. So sexy, come on, sing your song. You're so sexy, give it to me.
Thank you very much, Patrick.
And it gives you an insight of the panel of activities that we do to promote tourism in the urban tourism in the cities of France.
Indeed. And look, I should actually tell everyone watching this video that when you saw that fellow, Willie, I think, if I remember his name, from Moulin Rouge, doing that remarkable trick, put his head on the crystal, please do not try and do that in your home. Just go to Moulin Rouge and see these wonderful performers. Do not try and do it in your own home. But Patrick, we're going to now go to our panel discussion. And I just want to, first of all, thank you, Patrick, for a very informative presentation as ever. And our other two guests are Shemek Lesniak, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Lagardère Travel Retail Pacific, and Simon McGrath, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Accor Pacific. Now, one of the things that we've talked a lot about, and this is obviously at the heart of city tourism, is connection. And I just wanted to read, there was a paragraph in the Financial Review here in Australia a little while ago from Nesia Wilden. And it says, no matter how clever the product, how perfect the produce, that all-important sense of connection can be found only by going out and mixing with real people. And I see that as very optimistic. So I just want to have a check with our panel. In fact, Shemek, you're all about connection. You're all about real people. You're about touching with real people. Does that sort of give you a sense of optimism, what the suggestion is going to be?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very true. It's human nature. We want to be together. We want to be connected. We want to meet face to face. We can use from time to time technology, but we cannot live without contact with another person. And being for the development, as Simon said, or being just for leisure as well. We don't want to be on our own. We just want to spend time with our friends, families, or the other people. That's why we go to restaurants every evening, and we actually love the crowds in the restaurant. We don't go actually to a restaurant that is empty. You actually avoid a restaurant. Something is wrong with this place if there are no people in it. So absolutely, that's what we are about. That's the DNA, human nature DNA, and then that's why it's just a matter of time. We'll be back to travel, back to getting together, and that's why we look into the future with confidence, because it must recover.
That is optimistic. And Simon, I mean, the essence of your business is hospitality. That human connection that hotel groups like Accor obviously have invested so much into it. You must be sort of still optimistic about the absolute the credentials of hospitality and the fact that we will always want to travel and connect.
Yeah, look, I am, and I break it into two tranches. We've got a year, maybe 2 years of birthdays, celebrations, weddings, bar mitzvahs, to be had, that we've missed out on over certainly the last 12 months and possibly another 6 months ahead. So, there's an enormous pent-up demand of people wanting to recognise the past. But let's not forget there's a very, very new future. And there's a new future in commercial, new future in relationships, new future in opportunity. I mean, there is no doubt with the reset that the world is having, that the economic opportunity moving forward to capitalise on new businesses or current business or reshape current business is extraordinary. So I think the future of engagement and connection with people actually will deliver great returns. It's not about capping it. It's if you travel commercially or in a conference sense or even in a personal sense, the opportunity out there is great. So there's a new world that can only be had by being with people. And I think if you look at it on both those fronts, it's quite encouraging.
In fact, you talk about people, and I think that was very much what Nisia was saying. But the human cost of COVID in the tourism and hospitality business has been enormous. I just wanted to ask you, Simon, what was the impact in the cities? Because let's face it, we have such a big population of people who work in the industry.
Yeah.
And that then has that multiplier effect throughout the economy. How devastating was it for particularly your city hotels and the impact on the rest of the community?
Oh, incredibly devastating. And I think what we've been careful to do is shape politicians and other commentators on the industry. While some of the regional areas are full and doing very well, they employ very few people because they're smaller destinations by nature. The major employment in tourism is in the cities, and the cities, dropped to 10% occupancy and are still at fairly low occupancy levels and will come back slower and take and longer. They will come back, but it will be slower and longer. So the employment base has been most impacted in the cities. We've tried to move some of that employment into the regional areas and provide those jobs, but it's just not as large a market is the reality of it. So devastating impacts on employment. But, again, if there's going to be, for governments, particularly industries that provide job solutions for government over the next 2 to 3 years, you would suspect that each month tourism is going to be employing more people than last month or last year. So the rise in the employment outcomes, whilst devastating currently, will rebound quickly and will be great pathways for people. And you can't say that for every industry coming out of COVID. There will be industries that will be materially affected forever, but tourism will be a great upside for local economies.
In fact, Simon, I think the suggestion is that Australia will come out of the recession much earlier than people thought. So that is very, very encouraging. And then, in fact, if I can just go back to you, Shemek, the travel retail, you're almost, you're almost a barometer of confidence. And of course, in recent months, we've heard lots of things about luxury, probably again for the wrong reasons, like Cartier. Cartier has suddenly become a household name in Australia for all the wrong reasons. But do you think there's going to be a fundamental change in the way the way people buy, what they buy? Are we all going to go away from luxury product and just look at the necessities? Is that something that you factored in?
Yes, I think that's a very good question, and obviously the answer is not easy. We don't really know what's gonna happen, and but we see a much bigger trend to support our discussion about tourism. It's actually about buying local products, local produce, and this is probably the future. If you want to really propose and enhance this travel excitement for the passengers and for people wanting to experience new places in the world and visiting cities, but traveling through the airports, you need just to be almost like connected in the same ecosystem. So we need to talk the same language. So it's less about common luxury, which was to a certain extent in the airports prevailing before. It must be now about local products, local produce, experiences, local sense of place, and that's what we are trying to develop in our strategy, just to make sure that when customers leave Australia, for instance, who visit Australia, or customers leave other countries, they will just bring memories with them. So what they will see in the airport is a last have the interaction with what with their memories. Just remember where they were and what they visited, and that's why we need to focus much more on this in local products and in the produce. So probably the concept will change in the airports, the offer will change, the way you interact with customers will change. There will be still space, don't get me wrong, for the luxury. There will be always profile of customers wanting luxury, and that's will be there. But in terms of share of space, in terms of experience, probably our efforts, investments will be towards more local products.
Again, I think that's a really good point, Shemek. The whole connection with your local businesses and things like that. That seems to be something that will come through very, very strongly. Just a reminder to everybody watching this video that we will be opening up the session to everyone watching, and you can ask our very esteemed panel all the questions that you like. And I'm sure that one of them is going to be sustainability, because Patrick Benamou did talk about sustainability, and we also talked about overcrowding. Now, that whole notion of overcrowded cities, I don't know whether, Patrick, you talked about that as an immediate defense, because Paris is seen by a lot of people as overcrowded, and then questions sustainability. Do you think out of the whole post-COVID era that we're going to see a much firmer and decisive move towards sustainability and how you sell a city?
Yes, definitely. Sustainability now for multi-generation travelers, including Australian, will be one of the motivation in choosing a destination. What we've been noticing since COVID also is a trend which started in the second semester of 2021, when we thought that the international borders will be open, but have been kept going in the booking of 22 is what we call a slow tourism. For example, walking holidays, cycling holidays, a river cruise, barge cruising, where you can go along the river of the Burgundy River at 4 kilometers an hour. And we're already experiencing some very good bookings for 2022. So just coming back to the precedent question, where there is some level of optimism, because apparently 3 out of 5 Australians, they miss travel more than social life, more than the freedom of movement. So there is some shade of optimism. Someone says that we are over zoomed and under groomed. So I think that we believe in human nature, and as far as over-tourism for France, as I said, I think it's more prominent, more dangerous in other capital cities. Did you know that which is the first capital cities in terms of tourism, and in what kind of numbers? The number 1 is New York. 60 million tourists goes to New York. To give you an idea, Paris is 50 million and London is a 30 million. But cities like in Amsterdam, I used to live in Amsterdam to do that wonderful job to promote tourism to France, and we already see, you know, resentment of the population, an impact on the environment, on the pollution, the saturation of the public transport. So over tourism is a factor that we have to take into account, definitely, and sustainability.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Look, I really have to thank our panel. What a brilliant trio of experts who've given such a powerful view of not only where we are at, but where the situation is likely to go. And I think I'd love to say that in the end, I think everybody is pretty optimistic. It's difficult, but we're optimistic. So look, a formal thanks to Przemek Lesniak, the Chief Executive Officer of Lagardère Travel Retail Pacific, and Simon McGrath, the Chief Executive Officer of Accor Pacific. And we're now going to be asking all of you to ask questions. So as we prepare for that, what I'd just like to say is that it's been a fantastic opportunity to discuss the future of cities. We really do have to thank the French Australia Chamber of Commerce for organizing this event. And I know our three panelists will have inspired a lot of questions. So over to you.